George Eustice, in February 2010, David Cameron said this about lobbying. We all know how it works. The lunches, the hospitality, the quiet word in your ear, the ex-ministers and ex-advisors for hire, helping big business find the right way to get its way. Over a decade later, your party continuously in government since the former Prime Minister spoke those words. Nothing has changed, has it?
Well, things have changed in that after that, actually, of course, David Cameron and the coalition government made some changes to the rules around this, making clear that ministers leaving office, for instance, couldn't take such roles for a period of 2 years. I mean, David Cameron's obviously now been out for 5 years, so he satisfies that particular rule. But there were some changes that were made following that. But look, I know that questions have been raised regarding the Greensill case, in particular, issues, for instance, of civil servants, one in particular appearing to have had a job with Greensill while still working at the civil service. So there's an internal review looking at that particular element, this issue of civil servants potentially having 2 roles. And then there's also another inquiry that the Prime Minister set up on Nigel Boardman that's going to look at the whole Greensill case.
Let's return to the issue of David Cameron. No code of conduct and no government rules have been broken. Is that right in your view?
Well, look, obviously, the review is going to look at all of the details of this. We don't want to prejudge what it might come up with. It's going to look at all of the contacts that took place, conversations that took place, and what people did with it. But I think what I would say is, if you just step back from this and sort of put things into context, well, David Cameron approached the Chancellor and other ministers to raise a case about a company with which he was involved. They then raised that with their civil servants and with government and said, could we take a look at this? The answer came back that there's nothing we can do, we can't help them. And the business then went bust. So I think on the face of it, yes, I can see why people raise these sorts of questions, because David Cameron made an approach to the Chancellor and others, and so people ask these questions. But ultimately, nobody did him any favours in this. The truth is that the company didn't fit the criteria for funding, and it didn't receive any funds, therefore.
Do you think he behaved appropriately by making those contacts?
Well, I think David Cameron himself has said that with hindsight, he probably would have preferred to have approached them more formally by way of a written letter, so that it would have, gone through directly to private offices, and it would therefore, have looked less like he was trying to approach them in a more private way. But ultimately, of course, he understood that they would do exactly what they did do, and Rishi Sunak raised it with his private office and looked at it through formal channels, and wasn't prepared to do anything outside of that.
Let's have a look at the 2014 Lobbying Act, which was introduced by your government. You and I were MPs at the time. Does it need to include lobbying, not just by third parties? It only covers consultant lobbyists at the moment, lobbying firms. But should it include businesses themselves? It's a tiny number of lobbyists if you only include the consultant lobbyists.
Well, obviously, there's lots of different reviews now that are looking at this. So as I said, on the issue of the Greensill case, there's the Boardman review, and we'll really want to see that conclude before you decide what, if anything, needs to be done by way of policy change. There's obviously as well a number of parliamentary reviews now that will look at all of these issues and obviously look at whether there should be policy changes in light of it. I mean, my own view is that sometimes people can get too preoccupied with who spoke to who and where the conversations took place. But what really matters actually is, how did people conduct themselves after those conversations took place? Were there any conflicts? If there were potential perceptions of conflict, were those disclosed? And I actually think, therefore, that the ministerial code that all ministers abide by, and as far as I can see, all ministers who've been implicated in this current episode have also all abided by, is actually quite a strong protection and works quite well. And that is what matters most. So it's less about whether a conversation took place, it's more what happened after such a conversation might have taken place.
You're defending David Cameron very effectively, but I mean, do you get why this has all kicked off? David Cameron allowed Greensill to work from Downing Street, where he was an advisor. Then after leaving politics, David Cameron joined Greensill as a paid advisor, and in that role lobby ministers for that now collapsed businesses. I mean, it does stink, right?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that's the right way to describe it, but obviously it does raise questions. And that's why the Prime Minister quite rightly has said, questions have been raised about this. We're going to have a review led by a senior non-exec director who's got legal experience to really get to the bottom of this. And I think that's the right way to approach this. And we really, can't prejudge what that review will conclude. He's obviously going to take a comprehensive look at everything. And I think the right thing, therefore, to do is to wait for that review to conclude.
Labour have asked questions about the appropriateness of Boardman, who is leading that review. They point out that the person running that review is a non-executive director for a department implicated in the Greensill scandal.
Well, look, I deal a lot with non-executive directors, including in DEFRA, and actually, the idea that a lawyer asked to do an independent review wouldn't do a thorough job of it, I think, misses the point, really. The boards of all departments are there to provide external challenge. In that sense, they're not sort of part of the department, as it were. They are separate from it, and they're there to provide external challenge. And I think that Nigel Boardman will do a very good job of that.
The head of the watchdog monitoring standards for holders of public office, Lord Evans, has called for increased oversight of ministerial interests. Prime Minister's independent advisor on ministerial interests, that's a post that's been vacant since November, does not have the power to start investigations. Points out at the moment they have to be asked. He doesn't think that's right, and he's going to write to the Prime Minister to ask for more powers. Does that sound like a sensible request?
Well, as I said, there are a number of reviews underway, including some parliamentary reviews, but obviously as well internally, there's the Boardman review and the one that Simon Case is running on any sort of civil servant conflicts of interest. Once those have concluded, look, if there are policy lessons that come out of that, if it's considered that there are issues of perception around certain things, or that people don't have sufficient powers, then of course that's something that can be acted on after that in light of what comes out of this. But I would say there is, it's quite a thorough system that we have of declaring interests. All other ministers, any interests, any family members who might have particular positions on things, we do, that's all declared. And if there's a financial interest, obviously, and more important so, and that's declared on your MP's register of interest as well. So there's quite a lot of declaration of interest or potential interest that goes on at the moment. I think it's quite a thorough system that we've got. I think it generally works quite well. But that's not to say that if following this episode there are, certain lessons to be learned or tweaks or changes that could be made, that we shouldn't look at those.
I've been looking at the Topwood website. It says this is where Matt Hancock has shares. Topwood are pleased to announce that we have successfully achieved the British standard for the NHS. They were granted approval as a potential supplier for NHS trusts in England in 2019. How can it be right that the Health Secretary, who has 15% of shares in that company and is in charge of the NHS and stands to profit from the approved status that this company has been granted by the NHS, how can that be right? It just doesn't feel right, does it?
Well, of course, the reason we all know about this is that Matt Hancock did the right thing and what any minister would do in that situation, which is to declare that interest. And that's why everybody knows about it. And that's exactly how the system is supposed to work. He declared that interest. He's had no role in running the company, and indeed has no role whatsoever in the procurement in the area that this company deals with. And I think, in fact, the contracts it had were for Wales anyway, so it even goes beyond the remit of NHS England. So, yes, there could be a perception that there's a problem, which is why he declared it. But in practice, what should happen in these things is people ask the question, they look at it, they then conclude that actually Matt Hancock's had no involvement whatsoever in any procurement linked to this company. Therefore, the system's worked as it should.
It's been granted approval as a potential supplier for NHS trusts in England. So it's on their website that they're an approved supplier, for NHS trusts in England. Obviously, that company can use the powerful brand of the NHS to get further business. And when they do, Matt Hancock will profit from it because he has shares in it.
Well, any business that obviously fits criteria to offer procurement to the NHS would be in such a situation. The real question here is, did Matt Hancock have a role in making sure that that company was designated as an approved supplier to the NHS? The answer to that's no. He had no involvement whatsoever in it.
No, that's fine, but should he have those 15% shares? Because he will profit from the success of that company, which has been granted approval as a potential supplier for NHS trusts in England. They are very proud of having this status. It's on their website.
Well, I mean, I come back to what I said before. The question and the purpose of these things really is not whether it's right that somebody should have a financial interest in this or that company. It's much more, is there propriety about the way they approach their role as a minister? So in this case, it's absolutely right that Matt Hancock should declare that financial interest that he has. And the reason he will do that as well is to make sure that there's no perception that he's involved in any way around any procurement to that company. He hasn't been, he won't be. And indeed, one of the reasons why it goes on the register is to make sure that no one can be in any doubt about that.
Let's have a look at the last lobbying scandal, which took place under the last Labour government. You and I were candidates, parliamentary candidates at the time. It was back in 2010. A Channel 4 programme secretly recorded Jeff Hoon, Stephen Byers and Patricia Hewitt expressing a desire to work for a consultancy firm at a fee of up to £5,000 a day. No rules had been broken, but they were suspended from membership of the Labour Party for bringing the Labour Party into disrepute. Has David Cameron brought the Conservative Party into disrepute?
Well, I don't think he has. And as I said, rules were strengthened after that. David Cameron's government, coalition government, made some changes to the legislation, as you pointed out. But look, we've set up a review to look at this. I think that's the right way to go about this. The Prime Minister's set up an independent review to look at great depth and comprehensively at the whole Greensill episode. David Cameron himself said he's going to give evidence to that. And in fact, very much, according to reports, looking forward to being able to clear his name and explain exactly what he did and didn't do. He says he doesn't think he's done anything wrong at all here, barring, as he's conceded, potentially should have used a different route of communication.
You don't think the David Cameron Greensill affair has brought the Conservative Party into disrepute?
No, I don't think you can prejudge these things. Questions have been raised about it, but as I said, on the face of it, an approach was made to Rishi Sunak and to other ministers. They looked at this individual case for the company, concluded that there was nothing that could be done for it. No special favours were given. The business went bust. So on the face of it, everybody, I think, behaved as you'd expect them to. But look, because questions have been raised about the manner in which David Cameron approached people, this is now subject to an investigation, and the right thing to do is to wait for that to conclude.
So, in your view, it's okay for the Prime Minister to text former colleagues on behalf of a private company where he's being paid. That's okay. And if it's not okay to text them, it would be okay to go through more formal channels. That's appropriate behaviour for a former Prime Minister, to make those approaches to former colleagues and say, come and look at this company.
Well, I think, as I said earlier, the key thing here is really not whether a conversation took place, but what did the minister do after that conversation took place? And that's what the ministerial code's about. It's there to uphold, propriety in public life. We all declare those interests. And the key thing is, how did the Chancellor react when he was approached? Well, he looked at the case as you would expect him to. And also then he didn't do anything special for this company. When there was nothing that could be done, that result was fed back to David Cameron, and the business then obviously went bust. So I don't think the ministers involved here did anything that you wouldn't expect them to do, and they behaved with
to meet for a drink,
probity as far as I can see.
To meet for a private drink with the Health Secretary and the company involved and Greensill. That's just part of the course. It's just how we do politics.
Well, again, I think people can get too preoccupied with who people met and how they met. The really important question is, what did ministers do after that meeting? Did they grant anything special? In the case, for instance, of the Matt Hancock drink, as I understand it, he fed this idea back to the department for them to consider. Again, the conclusion was, well, there may be some interest in this option, but there would need to be a proper formal competitive tender with others able to bid for it as well. And I understand that's exactly what happened. So
there's nothing wrong with bidding. So Lord Wilson, the Cabinet Secretary from 1998 to 2002, said in yesterday's Times, he wrote a letter to yesterday's Times saying that he would, I quote, ban any former minister or senior official from lobbying government on behalf of any business that was paying them in whatever capacity. Very clear.
Well, as I said, there are a number of inquiries that are looking at all of these things. I think we have to have those inquiries to conclude before deciding what, if anything, needs to change about policy. So I know there is this issue about the difference between working for a paid public affairs agency, as it were, that might be working for clients, and the difference between working for a company. There are provisions at the moment, obviously, to prevent and limit what types of jobs ministers can take for a period of 2 years after they leave. I mean, if people want to look at that and review that, obviously that could be done, but it's the right thing to do is to look at those sorts of policy issues once these various reviews have concluded.
Okay, just going back to the Hoon, Byers and Hewitt affair, the Standards and Privileges Committee banned those concerned from having ex-MPs pass to access Parliament. In the case of Jeff Hoon, that was for a period of 5 years. Should David Cameron have a parliamentary pass which enables him to access the parliamentary estate?
Well, look, I think, yes, I think he should, because I don't think at the moment, I don't think you can prejudge this at all and say that he's done anything wrong. There were rules in place about restrictions on types of job that he could take after leaving office. As far as I can see, he meticulously abided by that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with somebody having conversations. And indeed, all former MPs, not just former prime ministers, but all former MPs do have a pass that gives them access to the House of Commons. I think that's right. It's the right way to treat former members of the House. And I don't really see a case for changing that in this.
You must have been very upset then when Jeff Hoon was barred for 5 years.
Well, look, I don't want to delve back into the realms of history on that one. The law was actually changed following that incident. It was tightened up. I mean, if people are now saying they want to review it again and change that again, obviously that's something that can be considered after the reviews have concluded.
Finally, I met you when I was a journalist and you were working for David Cameron as Director of Communications. You were then selected as a candidate and you worked for Portland Communications immediately before you entered Parliament. Nothing at all wrong with that. But why do you think you were employed by Portland Communications?
Well, predominantly, I had quite a lot of experience of dealing with the media. Yes, I joined Portland Communications and worked part-time there for a year. I'd had, by that point, 4 years experience of campaigns and dealing with the media. And of course, that was a big focus of Portland Communications at the time.
What sort of things did you do? Who did you work for?
I worked on various campaigns. We tried to do some work with some charities where we were offering some pro bono support in some areas. I also worked on campaigns to encourage responsible drinking and a few others besides, but it's a long time ago. I can't remember all of them.
George Eustice, thank you very much for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.